Hi everybody. This video is to walk you guys through your first essay assignment. So in the last couple of weeks you guys have read a number of texts from the sort of foundational period of early America. You've read different settlers' experiences and accounts of their voyages and their interactions with the native people. So the essay assignment here is pretty simple. I want you to choose one of the authors that we read in this unit, and you're going to write a written analysis of a work from that author that we read in this class. So if it's a letter and there's something like Columbus or De Vaca where you read two different letters, you could choose one letter or you could choose both, but I want you to choose one single author. I don't want you to compare between authors. And you're going to look at how that written text incorporates contextual elements related to the cultural history, the larger historical impact, or even the author's personal biography. Now, with something like Native Trickster Tales, obviously you're not going to have a single author, but you can talk about sort of the contextual history of those people. And you're going to contextualize this analysis around what was happening at the time period. So you're looking at the political, social, economic, or philosophical changes that were taking place as this new American identity was being formed. So I want you to make sure that you keep the focus on the text. Don't let this become a biography or a history essay. You want to make sure that you're analyzing the text in detail. So just like I do in the lectures where I look at something like, say, the syntax used by Columbus, how he uses the language of I rather than they or we, how he refers to the native people as sort of inanimate objects rather than actual human beings. How you break down the structure of the letters. So how is he positioning his audience? He's talking to the king and queen in a certain tone. These are the elements that I want you guys to be pulling out. I don't want this to become just a biography essay about Columbus's biography or history. Keep the focus on analyzing the text. Look at those elements that are related to textual analysis and literary analysis, because again, this is a literary analysis course. You want to make sure that the primary focus is on the text and the secondary focus is on bringing in those elements that we talk about the history and the biographies. So for example, if you're doing Anne Bradstreet, I want you guys to focus on the structure of the poems. I want you to look at things like imagery, symbolism, metaphors, similes. That's the primary focus. And then secondarily, I want you to think about the fact that she is the first trans-American female poet, and talk about how that kind of influences the views set forth in her poetry and why that matters. So that's really the key here, is to kind of look at, when you're thinking about these works, think about why it matters that we study these things. Why does it matter that we study Native Trickster Tales from Native American tribes? Why does it matter that we study something like Columbus's letters or Cabeza de Vaca's letters and how they position what it is to be an American in this very early America? Same thing with Anne Bradstreet. But again, most importantly, keep the focus on analyzing the literature as literature. So a few things to think about. What does the text do? Why does this text matter? Why do we need to study it? Why was it written? What's the purpose? With Columbus, there's a very specific purpose there. With De Vaca, also, same thing. There's a very specific reason that he wrote these letters. The Trickster Tales, why do they matter that they exist? Why does it matter that we have this understanding of this culture? And with Bradstreet, why does it matter that we're getting this view into sort of early social and family life in this sort of Puritan society? Think about, what do the structure, the subject matter, and maybe the tone show about the author or the society during this time period? What does the text say about the intersection between religion or society or family identity during this time period? And then how does the work influence our modern perception of history or national identity? So how does reading something like Columbus's letters shape or change our view of national history? Same thing with Bradstreet. What does it look like to understand what the family or social dynamics were, or the gender relationships between men and women during this time period? These are things just to consider. You certainly do not have to cover all of them, but you do need to include one source in your essay. This means that you actually pull specific quotes from that source and you use them in your analysis to support your argument. So make sure you cite it correctly. Make sure it's a credible source, something like biography.com, history.com, PBS. All of these are very credible websites. Again, you cannot use Wikipedia. Don't use something like a blog or an offshoot of someone's, thoughts on an idea. You want to use something that's a credible research source. Make sure you have a biography that cites the text that you are writing about as well as your source. And make sure that you are following the structure of a solid argument. So make sure you have a clear main ideas, a good thesis statement in your introduction that makes an argument about the text, and then expand on that with evidence from your outside source and from the text. So make sure that you're pulling in lots of quotes from the text that show what you're talking about. You want to use specific words, phrases, or passages to support your claims, and then expand on that with your own analysis. So this means that if you're writing about Columbus and you're writing about his letters and you're making the argument that Columbus was self-centric and self-serving, I would want you to pull in quotes that show him using the language of I. If you're going to talk about the tone that he's using, I would want you to pull in quotes that show how he talks about the native people as objects rather than people. I would want you to pull in quotes that show, say, the shift in tone. If you did the second letter, the shift in tone where he's begging for help from the queen. You need to show these things rather than just say them. So your essay is 3 to 4 pages in length and is due by Sunday, January 27th at midnight. When I say 3 to 4 pages in length, that means you have to go at minimum 3 pages down to the bottom of the 3rd page. You can always write more. You can't write less. If you write less, you do lose points. And make sure that you have proper MLA formatting. So that means a header in the top left corner with your name, the course, my name as the instructor, and the date. And in the top right corner, you want to have the page numbers. You also want to have a title. You don't need to bold it or do anything like that. Just make it a plain text title. And make sure you're using 12-point font, double-spaced, Times New Roman, Cambria, or Arial. You will also need to make sure that you cite all of your quotes in text, and then make sure you have a bibliography. So everything will be checked for plagiarism through SafeAssign. And this is what I'm going to be looking for. Close, careful analysis of the literature. So this is where I don't want it to devolve into a biography or a history essay. I want it to be focused on analyzing the literature. And then secondarily, bringing in the historical or biographical context. Good concrete evidence to support your claim. So that means quotes from the primary and the secondary sources. Appropriate number of research resources. That means at least one outside research source. Proper page length, MLA formatting, and citations. And a fully developed essay structure, including an intro, clear main ideas, and a conclusion, and then everything is carefully and clearly organized. Here are a number of things that you could look at when you're writing your literary analysis. You do not need to cover all of this. This is too much for a 3-page essay, but you can think about characterization, think about archetypes. So in the Native Trickster Tales, how do specific archetypes get filled? Look at who's the protagonist and antagonist. In Columbus's letters or Devaka's letters, you have clear protagonists and antagonists. Are the characters developed? Are they secondary characters, main characters? Are they flat, round, dynamic, static? Look also at things like similes, metaphors, personification, irony, foreshadowing, or flashback. Look at the dramatic arc. Does this follow the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement in the dramatic arc? Look at things like conflict, man versus society. You can look at the point of view and the narrator. How does that impact the meaning of the story? Or the letter, or the poem. Look at things like themes, symbols, motifs, allusions, style. Even in De Vaca's letters and Columbus's letters, you'll find allusions to biblical references. In the Native Trickster Tales, does it allude to anything else? Look at author, work, historical context, social, ethical, moral issues of the time. All of that, look at that secondarily. It's important, but it's not as important as analyzing the literature in depth. So if you need it, you have a lot of resources available to you. In the week 1 folder, you have MLA documentation, you have understanding of the basics, you have all of the things that you need to create a very strong essay here. So if you have questions, you are more than welcome to email me with them. But the purpose of this prompt is to keep it broad so that you guys can write about something that is interesting to you. Now, if you are covering something like Columbus's letters, make sure you keep your argument narrow and focused. So the thesis statement should make an argument about those letters. So you don't just want to say something like Columbus wrote letters and they were very important. That's not an argument. That's a statement of fact. An argument would be something like Columbus's letters give us a view into early relations with the Native Americans. They also create a tone of self-service and something like they create the idea of the other with the Native Americans. All of these would be arguments that are very narrow and focused for a thesis statement. For De Vaca, it could be something that's the opposite, where he's talking about the treatment of the Native Americans as equals and peoples and as human beings. That could be your argument, that why that's important that we have that view. If you do Native Trickster Tales, it could be something like the development of a specific genre and why it's important that we have an understanding of the trickster character in these Native tales and how it shows specific cultural context. For Anne Bradstreet, it could easily be a number of things. It could be focused on how her specific poem shows a specific view into family life. It shows interesting views of gender dynamics. It shows intimate views of relationships between men and women during the Puritan society and how that's sort of juxtaposed against the religious beliefs of the time. These are a number of different theses that you could use, but I want you guys to choose an argument about the text and then give it a good, close analysis as you're writing. So if you have questions, let me know, but otherwise I think this is going to be a really broad topic, so you guys can choose something that you find interesting.